Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Hope. And Michelina, my apologies. I gave you far too many acronyms in that introduction. And I should explain the SIAs and WEAs, Solar Industries Association and Wind Energy Association. So I have actually dealt with virtually all of the renewable energy associations of various technologies. My focus and emphasis and bias is certainly on ground source heat pumps because I've done that for most of my career, and that is a fairly key element of the presentation I'm going to be using tonight. Very quick background, yes, I was with the Foreign Office of the UK government running the Canadian branch of the climate security. That was the reason I got involved with Climate Reality, because we thought it would be a great opportunity to network with the environmentalists in Canada. And very, very quickly, the Foreign Office had an initiative called Climate Security, put up by Tony Blair. Canada was one of 3 countries pushing it. And the trick there was they hired me as a locally engaged Canadian to put some pressure on the Harper government to, let's call it, do something about climate change. So we had to be very politically adept because, of course, this is a foreign office, a government doing diplomacy / lobbying in a country. So we had to be very, very careful. And we took probably a year to set it up, dealing with all of the environmental groups to find out, how can we get Harper to actually do something? What are the hot buttons? And everything was working well. And the culmination was a presentation at a very important high profile meeting where our High Commissioner gave a speech in which he was as close to critical of the host government as you can get. And, so I'm sitting there, this is a year of planning, a year of writing a speech, getting it cleared by Whitehall. It was beautiful. I thought this was magnificent. I had high expectations. Next morning, show up at the office, phone, High Commissioner wants you in the office now. Went down there. Yeah. Wow, we succeeded. And the communications officer had been called into the Prime Minister's office and literally was told, to oversimplify, back off immediately or we stop pulling. Canada stops supporting Blair on the weapons of mass destruction Iraq debacle. So the High Commissioner turned to me and said, fine, you've got till this afternoon to come up with a whole new program. So it's very difficult when you're lobbying against entrenched views. Part of it, I don't think, with all deference to the Canadian government, I don't think he necessarily understood what climate change was all about, but he was also representing the vested interests, which, for goodness sake, guys, I mean, this is what we're up against. We're dealing with people who think it's okay. So I'm going to be touching with that. But as I say, so it was a year later that I got involved with the Al Gore, the climate reality thing, which did come in handy because, the contacts there were extremely good. My focus has always been on energy production and energy consumption. I try to stay away, let the other environmentalists handle wetlands and recycling and trees. My issue is purely how much energy is produced, for what purpose, why is it good, why is it bad, blah, blah, blah. So as I'm about to launch, we all know we have a problem, and the new association I'm involved with, Net Zero Plus Canada, thinks we have a contributor to a solution.
Bill, I think you've turned your camera off, but we can't see your screen either. I don't know if...
Maybe his computer crashed.
Not sure. We tested this beforehand, everyone, so it was working before. It's definitely keeping us on our toes.
Especially with the last sentence.
Oh,
yeah.
It was like, what happened? It was like very engaging. So,
Yeah. And then we're like, well, what's it gonna be?
hopefully he can work on that and get back.
Murphy's Law has joined the call. Indeed.
So in the meantime, we can.
I'm just gonna message him right now.
You do that. I can talk about my announcements that are in the chat.
Perfect.
It's our 15th anniversary of the organization. And so we really wanted to highlight all the work that you're all doing, because you're all doing such great work. And so we created kind of a submission form, and we're going to be publicizing that, obviously with your consent. And so, yeah, if you want just to nominate someone else or nominate yourself, feel free to do that through the form with the link provided. And Bill is back. So with that, I'll pass it back over.
Stephen Harper is listening, so be careful. Okay, my apologies. I have no idea what went on there, but I'm going to try and hopefully share my screen to go to some to-do slides. Here we go.
Oh, you're muted. We can see your slides, but can't hear. Oh, there you go.
Okay.
All good.
All right, I better take it very slowly here so that I don't mess it up any more than I can. All right, very quickly, our first problem is terminology. We have got to learn to speak about energy in a common term. By using terms like joules and BTUs and barrels of oils and horsepower and stuff like that, people are not getting a comparative picture of what is energy. So one of the main foci of the Net Zero Plus Canada is we're trying to get everything labeled in kilowatt hours. Why? I happen to be a metric fan, so I would prefer joules, but nobody understands what a joule is. Most people understand what a kilowatt hour is because it's what shows up on your electricity bill every month. Also the next challenge is also the rule of 3C that is very important. It's a rule that I have had for quite some time. It's conserve, so stop wasting energy, close the door, turn off the lights when you're not there. Second C is convert. If you've got incandescent lights, slap across the forehead, use LED. The third is once you have got your energy demand load down to the absolute minimum, then use clean, as in renewable or at least a non-emitting fuel energy source. So those are the key issues. The next screen I want to share is, and I hate to bore you with statistics, but they are fairly important. This is energy consumption in Canada, 2020 data from the federal government. Because I believe in kilowatt hours, I've changed from petajoules to kilowatt hours. These are the 5 sectors that are shown or tracked by the federal government. Obviously, residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural, and transportation. They are showing how many billions, with a B, of kilowatt hours are consumed in each of those 5 sectors every year, and the number of megatons of carbon emitted from each of those 5 sectors in the same year. So you're looking at a fairly large number down there at the bottom. But I do want you to look at the next slide, which is introducing thermal. And my focus today is going to be on thermal, which is the vast majority of the energy used in the residential and commercial sectors. So of the 396 billion kilowatt hours consumed in the residential sector, 324% of it, or 82%, is for space heating, space cooling, and water heating. Those are thermal loads. The plug load, which is lights and appliances, that needs electricity. But the need and the opportunity to change thermal load is where Canada can have the greatest impact. You're looking at 324 billion kilowatt hours compared to all passenger transportation consumption, 315. So heating and cooling our homes uses more energy than all passenger cars in the country. If you look at the megatons of thermal, again, 49 megatons is from thermal of the 57 that we emit. So very high possibility for getting down the amount of carbon that we're gushing into the air. Because we're using kilowatt hours, and we know that there are roughly 20 million households in Canada, and NRCan tracks the number of square meters, we do this simply to get it down to a human level. This is secondary energy use in kilowatt hours per year, per household and per square meter. So for space heating, water heating, space cooling, if you add up the 3 thermals, of 26,000 that your house needs, 21,000 is for the thermal, approximately 5,000 is for lights and appliances. If you look at per square meter, It's 181, of which 148 is for the thermal load. This is very useful because people say, oh, I've got a very small house, I'm only 800 square feet or whatever, versus and I'm going to talk about my former house, which was 3,700 square feet. Yeah, obviously the person in 800 square feet better be using less energy than I am, but if you break it down to per square meter or per square foot, it does help people to get some concept of how much energy they are using, regardless of how large or how small their house is. And if you want to look at carbon emitted, again, per household, the average household, and a household is a house down to an apartment, down to a trailer, mobile trailer, each house is 3.8 tons of carbon. Per square meter, that's 26 kilograms per square meter. That works out to, strangely enough, 4.6 pounds per square foot is the thermal load, or the carbon emissions. I used to have a presentation in my last house, and I would have a 12 by 12 tile, and I would have put a 2 kilogram bag of sugar on to show that was how much carbon was released for every square foot of my house per year. And that was that was a very efficient house. So that wasn't what I was emitting, but that was what the average house in Canada emits. Literally 4.6 pounds per square foot. And in terms of kilowatt hours per square foot, for thermal, it's 13.8 kilowatt hours per year. So it's a reasonably significant amount of energy and carbon being released as a result. The trick here is to get people to understand these numbers, which is why we've taken it down to a house or per square meter. You now can understand this. We don't like the term petajoule because I don't think there are too many people here who understand what a petajoule means. So we've got to get it down so that it's actionable, so that you understand where your problem is or where your badness is, and then you can look at how to change your space heating, water heating, space cooling. Again, following the rule of 3C, so conserve, stop wasting, close the doors, blah, 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 convert to something energy efficient, and then when you get it down, you can go to a clean energy source. As I say, we've tried to encourage people to focus on personal action. And there's a lot of misunderstanding, and I want to get into that with the discussion. But the next slide that I did want to do is just sort of electricity generation in Canada per year. All of the facilities that generate electricity in Canada, it's about 640 million megawatts, which is 640 billion kilowatts, but I didn't want to add 3 extra zeros. It shows by the source. And if you look at the 640 million or 640 billion, that is compared to the 550 billion for thermal in homes and commercial offices. So we're going to get into the implications of what would happen if everybody installed heat pumps. Ground source is my preference, obviously. We need an awful lot of electricity in order to run those systems. I want to talk about net zero. And net zero, like many other terms, is highly problematic in terms of definition. Right now, there's huge greenwashing that somebody who recycles a piece of paper says, oh, I'm net zero because, I did this, or I didn't drive to the store today, so I'm net zero. Corporations are extremely problematic with this because they keep saying that we're net zero. They don't define what net zero is. They don't explain what they are consuming, what they are producing. The recent forest fires in Canada have shown that if you've bought carbon offsets based on forests, we have burnt 10 million hectares of forests. And I've got the data somewhere of how many tons, megatons of carbon those forest fires have released. Ignoring the fact that those trees are no longer able to capture or sequester carbon, we have released it, as well as the nitrous oxide, as well as the methane. It will have a fairly large impact on Canada's carbon hit because of the number of forests that we have burnt down this year. And yes, it's a cyclical problem. Many of the forests are now burning because climate is getting warmer, blah, blah, blah. So we've got to stop the trend or stop the bad cycle somehow. And that's a good way to start it off. So the next slide I want to use is to talk about a net zero plus heat pump. I'm going to pause for 10 seconds to talk about our last house, which was near Ottawa. Was a very good house, 3,700 square feet. The builder, the original person who built it before we moved in, it was absolutely due south facing, and the inclination of the roof was exactly what it should be. I think 1 degree off for solar panels. But very nice house. It was heated by propane. He had forgotten to insulate the attic, which we found out when we bought the house. So that was a bit embarrassing for the owner. She had to give us a discount to insulate the attic. But we did a lot of changes, and I can give you a link to show what we did. But everything, it was double wall construction, as in most contractors have no idea what double wall is. But we changed all of our windows, and a fair amount, because we were on the Jock River near Rapid. So guess what we wanted? We wanted vision of the outside. Our windows were triple glazed, double low E, krypton gas filled windows. The R rating, RSI rating of our windows was much higher than most people's walls of their houses. The place was absolutely airtight. I installed my own geothermal heat pump because I was an authorized dealer. I over-installed, long story, I can get into that if anybody cares, but literally we dropped dramatically in terms of the amount of heat that we needed, because it was now dispatchable renewable energy from the ground. 93, and as an all electric house at that point, because the heat pump was providing the thermal space heating, water heating, space cooling, as well as the grid was supplying our lights and appliances. So we were totally off everything except for electricity. 93% of our electricity was consumed in off-peak period. So the heat pump would kick in about 3 o'clock in the morning on a winter's day, and it would shut off at 6:59 a.m. just before the rates went up. So we were paying 7 cents a kilowatt hour and avoided the 14 cents a kilowatt hour. The fun time I had was I was on an advisory committee, and the head of Hydro Ottawa was involved. And Hydro Ottawa allows you to take, it does a screenshot of your energy consumption. And so our display was simply, it starts kicking in about 3 o'clock in the morning, peaks, drops off. I worked from home, so I had to have a kettle and a computer all day long. So there was a load that I had to use during peak time. But 93% of our electricity over a year was consumed in the off-peak period. And I showed the graph, and the head of Hydro Ottawa said I was doctoring the data because he could not understand how I was not using more electricity during peak period. And I said, well insulated and a heat pump, so that, the heat pump is pumping the heat into the house during the pre-7 a.m. times, and it's holding it there for the majority of the day. We'd turn it on sometimes at mid-peak, like noon, if it was really cold. Other than that, it never went on again until after dinner. So we were paying peak electricity for breakfast kettle and dinner cooking. Other than that, we were not using any electricity during peak period. He could not understand how you can avoid that type of electricity demand. So in the average house, if you remember, the consumption was 21,000 for thermal, emitting 3.3 tons, and plug load was 48, 100 kilowatt hours. If you install a net zero heat pump, the heat pump is producing all of the thermal. So it's producing 21,000 kilowatt hours a year. The heat pump requires electricity to run the compressor. At absolute maximum, it's a 3.2 coefficient of performance, blah, 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 efficiency rating. So you would need at most 6,700 kilowatt hours. Our system, because I installed it, was way less than that. It was, I don't have the data for my house, but on average, I would have been about half of that 6,700. The CO2 emissions are the ascribed carbon emission per kilowatt hour of electricity nationwide, roughly 100 grams per kilowatt hour, so 677 kilograms. And then, of course, the plug load is the same. I'm assuming, again, that nobody has done step 2 of the rule of 3C, which is convert, that everything should be high energy efficiency appliances, Energy Star rated. Everything should be LEDs, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of stuff that you need to do to affect the entire profile. But once you've got a net zero plus heat pump, you are therefore producing 21,000 kilowatt hours of dispatchable renewable energy. That is never attributed or ascribed or credited to a heat pump right now. That's one of the major rationales or objectives of Net Zero Plus Canada is to get the heat produced by a heat pump recognized as renewable energy, because it is. It comes from the ground. You need grid power to get it out, but it's producing 21,000 and you are consuming 11,000. So it's a 2-to-1 ratio. Your CO2 emissions go from 3,800 kilograms down to 1,200. But the 2.2 to 1 ratio, the common nomenclature or description or definition for net zero is production must equal consumption. A net zero plus heat pump, you now are producing twice as much energy as you are consuming. And that's a very difficult concept for an awful lot of people to understand. But that, as I say, is one of the major objectives of Net Zero Plus Canada, is to get people to understand that. Stop the sharing, and don't worry, I'm getting close to the end of this, everyone. So the purpose of a Net Zero Plus heat pump is not only getting credit for the production of renewable energy on a dispatchable basis, but also a heat pump does not require batteries. The ground is the battery. They're very efficient. If you, and we're not saying this, but if somebody wanted to give rebates like a production tax credit for the efficiency, every kilowatt hour put out by a heat pump, I mean, if solar and wind are getting a credit for generating kilowatt hours by solar panels or turning wind blades, why shouldn't a home, a building, receive credit for producing thermal energy that is pumped into the building? So I'm going to wrap up, and just simply to say that no one denies fossil fuels are the culprit. Well, people like Enbridge deny it, but most people recognize that it's fossil fuels. You know, we have to examine, why are there fossil fuels being used? Where are they being used? If they're being used to heat your building, maybe there is an option that you've got. Heat pumps are not cheap, but on an ongoing investment basis, you know, that is part of our lobbying strategy, is to say more recognition needs to be given to people who change their thermal load off, as opposed to giving us a whole lot of grants simply to change our plug load, which, as you noticed, was about 15% of the average house. I'm going to wrap by simply doing the caution that I always give is, I'm a very strong advocate of renewable energy, but I've been kicking since, 2015, a bit of a caution that nobody seems to understand, that we have to be very cautious about promoting renewable energy as a replacement for energy. And basically the argument is, if solar and wind and geothermal become so cheap that they become free, therefore we will generate, output one very large amount of energy. If we do, what is that energy being used for? You know, does that encourage us to be wasteful? Do we increase our own affluence? Do we try to help, you know, less wealthy nations, you know, and should other nations around the world share in the wealth that we have? And if that's the case, and we all have that much energy that is no cost, do we deplete our resources a little bit more? What happens to the need for lithium for batteries? It's just a caution that I always close on, saying, please think through before you do anything. You know, the rule of 3C is conserve, convert, clean. Conserve is obviously the major point, that the old negawatts argument from Amory Lovren's. We have to be very careful about what we are doing with energy and why we are doing it, because it has implications going forward. But that is my conclusion. Hope, Michalina, please take it to the next step.
Thank you so much, Bill. That was a really great presentation, and I look forward to going back through all of those slides and really like seeing through those numbers again. I welcome any questions or personal experiences that anyone else wants to share about you know, learning about retrofitting, learning about heat pumps, learning about you know, what net zero maybe means to you, what that journey looks like. Laura, go ahead.
Hey there. First of all, Bill, thank you so much for this topic. Thank you. I've been looking for information on ground source heat pumps now for several months, And the first thing anyone will say is, oh, you don't want a ground source heat pump, you just want an air source. Well, no, I'd actually like to fully understand ground source because I think maybe I could do that. Oh, no, you don't want that. No, you don't want that. You want air source. And it sounds like air source is super simple. And, you could do a hybrid unit and all this kind of stuff. I just want to understand the ground source one. So here's my question. My thinking is that ground source is far more efficient than air source. And I've read somewhere that it more than pays out. So yes, it's far more expensive, but it more than pays out. That same organization, which is very well respected in the area, had the price of ground source at about $25K. And then I spoke with someone else who was more of an expert in ground source, who said it was more like 75. And then I asked somebody else, they said, yeah, it's about 80K. How on earth could that pay out versus the efficiency you could get with air source? And I thought, okay, so maybe I am stuck getting air source. And yet I still keep going back to it's more efficient, it's quieter, it lasts longer. So help me find the right information.
Laura, I totally understand where you're coming from. Yes, because even when I ran the associations, my members had problems. People would phone up, say, how much to install a heat pump? You've got major factors. And for those on the call that don't understand what the factors are, you need a heat loss done of your house. So it's an F2, whatever the revised CSA version of the F280 is. They come in, they put a blower door on your home. They find out how leaky your house is, how large is it, how much energy you need in that house. So that's one thing, is how much do you need? The second is for ground source, what is the type of soil you are on? If you are on dry clay silt, you're going to have to install a very large loop. And the rule of thumb is that 75% of the cost is digging the trench or the holes to put the pipe in that do the transfer from the ground to your house. So that is impossible for somebody to say unless they happen to know that you're on, granite. One of the greatest sites in Canada is the observatory up in the Gatineau. The federal government drilled into granite. So that would have been a fairly pricey thing, but the system works extremely well. One of the largest sites in Ottawa that I used to love lobbying, I'd go into downtown government buildings and I'd say the second largest site in Canada is the Museum of Civilization, or Canadian History, whatever it's now called, across the river. It was a river loop. So they took water from the Ottawa River. They're a cooling dominant load, so they don't need heat as much as cooling. They took the water and basically injected the heat from the building into the water and discharged it back into the Ottawa River. At the same time, they were setting up the Canadian War Museum, and we were lobbying to have that done. There was too much hot water being put into the Ottawa River. They couldn't do the same museum because of that technology. But that's a very common one in cottage country, is you throw a loop into the lake, assuming you've got a large enough lake, you suck in water, you take the heat out, heat your cottage, or take the heat, throw it into the water. So you're discharging slightly cooler or slightly warmer water into the lake. You have avoided a huge cost of the loop. But as I say, the major problem with the installation is what type of soil do you have? It's called the thermal conductivity of the soil, and it changes. They don't know unless they come over. If you've got a lot of rocks, if you've got a lot of trees, if you've got a lot of neighbors, if you don't want your garden dug up, you're a problem because somebody is going to have to mess it up. I was lucky with my last house. I did it myself. So I rented a Kubota, figured out how to use a Kubota, dug deeper than I was legally allowed because labor law says you can't go below what I forget the depth, 1.4 meters, without those metal bars to protect the person in the trench from a cave in. So I didn't do that. I simply went in the ditch myself and told my wife, hey, sweetie, if it caves in, pull me out. There are certain things that you can get away with when you're not a commercial operation. And I put in more loop than I needed. Again, I was able to do things that other people can't do, but you will hit some barriers, some of which are legitimate. But unless you've got a really, really, really leaky log cabin and you need you want to keep it as a steam bath and you've got horrible soil with a lot of priceless plants, 80,000, wow, your people are smoking. But part of the problem, and again, without disparaging the industry, it's easier for them to sell you an air source because they can give you a quote over the phone. They are making far less profit margin, but they can handle 10 of you Whereas one painful person who wants details, yeah, they're going to make 10 times the profit margin, but they're going to waste or invest 20 times the time that they're doing it. So it's just not worth it to them. Air source is cheaper. But let me also point out there are problems with air source. Air source only works to maximum minus 25 Celsius, and then they die out, even the cold units. So the older ones would work to about minus 15, minus 20. The good ones are now minus 25. But what happens if you hit minus 26? You'd better have some backup. And also, as you get closer to that minus 25, the efficiency is a 1-to-1. So you might as well have electric baseboards, because that's what you are now doing, is heating your house with electric baseboards. You're not extracting any more heat from the air. So if everybody in the country installs an air source, and by some unfortunate chance, we have a huge cold snap, well, goodbye. You'd better have a backup heating source at that point. So ground source, you don't need it.
So can I just ask a quick follow-up question? So in your experience, which is extensive, does a ground source pay out? I'm not anywhere near a lake. I don't have any water. It'll be vertical boreholes, not horizontal. Would it generally pay out despite the high price tag?
Depending on what our esteemed government and utility officials say is the price of electricity going forward, since we obviously know that they are going to intelligently ascribe a price to electricity, of course, we're in good hands with Ontario Hydro and Hydro Ottawa and other local distribution. Quick answer to your question, because I don't know how much you're going to pay. I mean, at 80,000, I would say probably not. 25,000, if electricity prices continue to ratchet up, yeah, you probably have. I think our house, again, we didn't pay what a normal person would pay because I installed most of myself and I got a good deal. I think ours was something like a 3-year payback. It's unheard of. That was absolutely absurd. So what is your payback period that you're willing to, the investment? If you're stuck there and selling our house, literally one of the buyers said, "Oh, you've got one of those disasters," and I realized that they had heard the story that ground source is a problem. And I had to do a very long explanation and a couple of 2x4s across his cranial lobe. No, you've heard the wrong stories. It's a very good thing, but I can't answer your question because I don't know how much you're going to pay, how much to install, how much to pay to operate, and what is your comfort level on payback.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
Laura. Okay.
That was very helpful, though. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. I'm going to direct to the question in the chat that Michelina posed because she had her hand up before. So do you want to just read your question?
Yeah, for sure. So I just live in a building with electric baseboard heaters like in each unit. So yeah, like what can I do to be more energy efficient and sustainable? Like Montreal is run on hydroelectricity, but like I know like there's probably more efficient ways. And so I was just wondering, since you're very well versed in this field.
Are you talking a house or an apartment building with other people?
With other people, yeah.
Okay.
So like, unit has electric baseboards here for their own thermostat, essentially.
The barrier for you is the fact that there is no distribution network in the house. There's no ductwork, there's no hydrant flooring. It's electric resistant, so you've got those little suckers sitting on your baseboard. There's not a lot. There are a large number of community buildings, and if you do it from stage 1, and I tried to lobby the city of Ottawa that all new construction, by definition, should have a heat pump because you've got the backhoes on the property. You've got no beautiful perennial gardens. Dig the heck out of the yard, put the loop in, and we were lobbied. The dealer I was working with, we were lobbied by the gas industry, who then appealed to the city, put in an injunction because people have the right to natural gas for their fireplace. So they were able to get gas in, and at that point, gas was certainly more competitive than a heat pump installed. But if you did it from ground one, as you're building your bloody building, put it in there, and that's how most commercial buildings are done now. They dig out the garage, they put the loop down, either vertical or horizontal, that then does the building above that, and nobody knows that they're on heat pumps. But yes, you'd have to have ductwork or hydronic heating, something like that. If you're on electric resistance, there aren't an awful lot of options for you, Michelina. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question actually about that. So regarding you lobbying the city and I run the Community Climate Hubs program, which is very much based around municipal climate action. And so like two questions in one sort of. First of all, do you know of a city in Ontario or in the country that has a bylaw in place that enforces the installation of heat pumps in any new builds? And two, if so, or if not, do you know, or sorry, this is a separate question of, do you know, like do municipalities have those stats of like how many buildings within their city even have heat pumps installed already?
Your second question is easier, Hope. No, nobody has any idea how many heat pumps there are, because you then have, is it ground source, is it air source? You probably would have by bylaw somebody be able to say, this guy asked, these 73 houses asked for a permit for, or had to make sure that their utility demand would handle an air source. But no, I have never seen a database, even the Natural Resources Canada database that we steal from, that says heat pumps, groups them both together. We can't disaggregate them. And I don't know of any community that has that restrictive bylaw. They can say new buildings must be X% efficient, but they leave it up to Enbridge to lie about, oh, well, our natural gas system is this, and it's restraint of trade if you do it. And they're very good. Again, we were caught on one of the very first anti-restriction bylaws that gas says, no, there should be a right for anybody to install whatever the heck they want. And cities trying to impose a heat pump only bylaw, even on new construction, very difficult.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, it seems like, I mean, the way that you talked about how, I was a little bit familiar with this already, how buildings, and especially obviously thermal heating, makes up so much of Canadian emissions. It seems like that should be a really obvious first step in. And we talk a lot about retrofitting, but it's true that, a lot of new buildings are coming up where I feel like a lot of people are talking about, well, we all know we're in a housing crisis. Homes are being built so fast right now. And so it's such an opportunity to make sure that all of these houses and all of these apartment buildings that are being built are done in an efficient way. And I know there's been discourse around here in Halifax where so many new buildings that are being built with like very, very poorly insulated materials, like they're all glass and concrete. And it's like, this is such a missed opportunity to build any new buildings that are efficient.
But if you don't put in insulation, you probably can shave $300 off the cost of a house. I mean, isn't that getting you almost to where you want to go from a market point of view? There are a number of creative municipal ventures. I'm aware of one in Montreal where it was an older neighborhood with one of those pathways or whatever, the lanes in the back, and they dug up the lane, they installed a heat pump loop in there, and X houses, I'm going to say 20 for easy math, all fed off it because the hot water is being taken up to my window. And as long as I've got a distribution network in my house, it goes into my ductwork and can actually do it. And it always works better in a combined load, which is, if you've got apartment buildings where there's a gym and people are sweating and you're trying to get rid of heat, and you've got somewhere where it needs heat, and you just transfer internally, you can bypass the loop a lot. And that's used frequently in the commercial institutional sector, because schools are an ideal opportunity, because again, there are many areas where kids are sweating like crazy and you're trying to reduce the heat load or the heat output, and libraries where you need the heat. So you can match it, and you can what is called short loop the system so that you don't need as much of that 75% investment in the ground digging.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I wonder, you mentioned like the schools. So I also realized I'm taking up a couple questions in case anyone wants to go before me. But you mentioned schools, and it reminded me, I had a question when you were talking about, the 3 C's. I actually hadn't heard of the 3 C's before this talk. It made sense logically, but I don't think I had heard it as explicitly said. And you were saying like, Net Zero Plus is out to educate people about this. Can you talk a little bit about your education initiatives?
We hired a summer student. She's actually on this call. So the two of us who formed the association are old geezers that, there's this thing called social media. We're not quite sure what the heck people are talking about. So yeah, we had to hire Brooke so that she can translate our blithering into English and post it on things so that people can understand. So pay attention, Brooke, you're in charge of making nice little graphics and pictures that people can grasp, and taking what I've just said in 30 minutes, get it down to a 30-second YouTube video. That's her job, is to encapsulate it. So it's going to be a multifaceted approach. And we're going to start with, we're hitting the media very soon. As soon as we've got enough content that we can start promoting it, we're going to hit the media to say, hey, net zero is a popular, sexy, misunderstood, misconstrued, and really screwed up term. Here's a story for you. We have to go to the industry because, as I say, after 10 years of running the ground source heat pump industry, they never understood what I was saying. Again, I'm far too long-winded, so they zoned out halfway through my description. But we need the industry to start saying that they are producing renewable energy, because literally they like the term energy efficiency. It was very popular 2-3 decades ago, and they haven't evolved to the point where they say, yes, they're still energy efficient on a commercial energy, but they still produce the 20,000 kilowatt hours of heat. It's just they only need 1/3 of that to run the compressor, but they are producing that amount of renewable energy. It is dispatchable. I proved that 93% is produced in off-peak periods. So, I was a major benefit to the utility. I'm a form of battery that, I'm using their electricity at night when the Ontario is trying to ditch their hydro, their electricity. I'm using it up there and then not going on when everybody else is charging, their toasters or kettles or whatever else. So, there should be benefit, but until the industry starts talking about it, another target audience are environmentalists, which is, the purpose of my chat here today, is we need the climate reality, the environmentalists, all of the derogatorily called tree huggers, to understand that, there is something that us can do with our homes. Awkward, difficult, expensive sometimes, but some people can do it. And if only 50% of us can do it, you saw the figures. We could reduce that power consumption, that energy consumption dramatically, because we are now producing renewable energy.
Amazing. Lena, do you want to go? Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to mention that I think this would be super relevant for students as well. And so our youth coordinator is having a Youth Climate Week of Action in September. And yeah, I'll definitely connect you to it if that's something that you're interested in, because I think students could definitely advocate for this on their campuses. And we're also launching a program called the National Climate League Campus Edition, where students will collect information on like where their school sources their energy from, and these kinds of information. And so that could be another kind of outlet for them to campaign towards like heat pumps on their campus instead of, unrenewable sources. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, and it is key that people understand where their energy comes from. And it's nice if it comes from wind and solar and whatever else. But I was the first house. Our last house was the first in Eastern Ontario to install the microfit. And for those not familiar with microfit, it was an Ontario initiative that if you installed solar panels at your own cost, they bought the output for 80 cents a kilowatt hour. 80 cents a kilowatt hour. I'm paying 7 from the grid. Now, I was not allowed to use any of that output. It went directly into the grid. So Ontario Hydro or OPA, was able to credit. They got the environmental attributes. I was simply paid 80 cents a kilowatt hour. But the funny thing there is that solar does not work before 9 o'clock on December 21st. It does not produce until 9 a.m., which is after the peak period has ended. And the panels have gone to sleep by 5 p.m., which is the start of the evening rush hour. So I was not contributing anything in winter peak, contributing a very large amount in summer, but in winter, I was only contributing in the mid-range of a winter day. So solar is great, as long as you've got batteries. Wind, also great, as long as you've got batteries, stuff like that. The major asset of a ground source heat pump is press the button, it goes on. And if you program it the way we did to our last house, turn it on at 3 o'clock in the morning, consume electricity if you get the tiered rate. So you're using electricity at that stage, heating your house. If you are well insulated, the heat will stay in your house for the majority of the day. And you are now a producer of renewable energy. you're not selling, so it's not like wind and solar, which is selling it to California or whatever over hydro lines, high tension lines. You're using it in your house, but it is a renewable energy. It's coming from the ground. It is energy. You can put your hand over the exhaust of your vent. It's energy, for goodness sake, and it's warm, and that's all you care about. You're paying to get it out of there, but even your gas furnace, you need electricity to run the distribution pump or the fan to distribute your gas heat throughout your house. So it's not just gas, you also need electricity. We are ground heat, and we're needing a little bit more to run the compressor so that we can transfer the heat from the ground into my house. So getting people, let alone students, to understand it is a very complicated thing because, again, wind and solar, they're the only renewable energies around. Well, yeah, no. When I worked for the Solar Industries Association, solar PV was just coming in. So solar thermal, which nobody knows about anymore, but it's what was used to heat water for swimming pools and car washes. You know, they were copper pipes that sat in the sun, they got warm. Solar thermal air, Canadair, and what's the other, the Ford Motor Plant in Oakville. The entire south-facing wall is a piece of metal. The sun hits it, it comes in, the hot air rises up, goes into the top of the building, and fans blow it down. That is a renewable energy, and it can be quantified. It can be, you know, tracked completely. That's solar energy. Wind used to be pumps. I mean, that's where it started in Holland and stuff like that. You know, water pumping and stuff like that. The U.S. South was water pumping. Then they said, hey, why don't we make electricity? Because electricity is unfortunately a very effective carrier. And we've gone to electricity as opposed to various other options. But if that's the case, as I said, you know, we've got to learn to speak in kilowatt hours. If we're going to electrify, we have to speak in electric ease. So that's a key part of our goal, is get people to stop using calories and BTUs and all of this garbage and talk kilowatt hours. We can then compare, so that your gas furnace is X kilowatt hour output, not BTUs. And, you know, and I always love the thing, BTUs is, most people know it's a British thermal unit. Very few people know that it's measured. It's the heat emitted from the striking of a hard match 100 years ago. You know, they needed a way to measure at the start of the Industrial Revolution. It's literally how much heat is put out by one of those old stick matches when you struck it. So a 50,000 BTU unit is you're striking 50,000 matches all at the same time. Yeah, and that's really practical, and a kilowatt hour is to a large degree. I mean, just somebody came up with it, but for goodness sake, it's consistent. It can be applied across all energy sources. Let's stick to a common nomenclature. Stop calling it tons of TNT and all. And half of the stuff on that list I showed you, I don't even know what an erg and other things like that are. There were a whole lot that I thought, should I look at this? No, I can't be bothered. But we've all got different ways of calling it energy. Let's call it the same.
Absolutely. I'm gonna ask a few questions that are popping into the chat. And so first of all, Laura has two good questions. One is simply like how to reach out to Net Zero Plus Canada, but maybe we can get to that towards the end because we can kind of explain it all. And then you can also give me the details and I'll put it in a follow-up email. But the second one she asked was if we produce more than we consume, this was back a little bit when you were talking about, I think, you know, producing energy within your own home, does that excess get sold back into the grid? And so you talked a little bit about that, but generally, is that what happens?
No, and normally net zero, a company that, you know, uses X units of energy and they're buying carbon offsets for the same amount to offset. That's on the environmental as opposed to the energy side. So it doesn't go back into the grid. It is all used in your house. But once the trick is, we're trying to get people to stop thinking of yourselves as consumers, which is what we currently are. If some of us can become producers, we are helping reduce the need for, you know, commercial energy off the grid or off gas or off whatever. So no, it's purely internalized. It's got nothing to do with, now, there is one of the options we've got, and there are some people working on it in the United States, that you are producing. So you install extra pipe, you need 50% of the output for your house. You've got heat that you can sell to somebody. And that is actually a marketable commodity. So it would be selling to not the grid, but to your neighbor, to whatever. Think of it as you have a large heat pump in your house and your neighbor has a electric baseboard system that has failed. You could run a pipe, a ductwork over to that guy's house and sell him your heat. Yeah, so that would be marketable. Yeah, obviously there are some issues there, but yes, currently the way it's envisaged is the heat is produced off your property and is consumed within your property. And again, that's decentralized. Why do we need to worry about being part of the great unknown if you can produce 20,000 kilowatt hours and use 20,000 kilowatt hours on your house? Yes, you will need to bring in some grid power, but hey, it's a better, equally good system.
Did that answer your question, Laura? Amazing. Yeah. Any other questions we have in the audience? If not, I have a whole more host of questions.
Go for it, Hope.
I think this is just going back to the practical side of things, and you know, kind of even going back to like, how can we get in contact with you? Because I think I'm really fascinated about your passion to demystify all of this and to really set the record straight. And so obviously, you know, you mentioned you have a student this summer. That's really great. But I think you know, we have such a great community, and we often like to share around our resources in terms of like slideshows, for example. Like, do you ever do presentations, or at least will you start doing presentations that you like solicit outwards to organizations and groups and schools and whatnot?
The quick answer is yes, I have done presentations, and yes, the basis of the presentation that I've given tonight, I've got the notes, and as soon as I learn how to use my computer and not block and drop my calls, yes, will become the basis for YouTube's presentations to anybody who's stupid, I mean crazy enough to ask us to speak. Very much. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, maybe we'll ask you back for like a larger call outside of just Ontario, because I think like this is really yeah, really important information that I think you do a really good job just kind of translating it into plain language and using real world examples. And I think all of this stuff is quite mystifying sometimes, and it's easy to just be like, well, numbers. Yeah. I'm not going to think about it, but it's when you realize like how impactful it is, it's really great.
And that's why I hate to use numbers, and that's why Brooke is in charge of translating all of those big numbers I show, because if I'm saying kilowatt hours, I mean, to a degree, that's a very, very large number. Saying 93 petajoules is very smart, very nice, very concise, but who the heck knows what 93 petajoules is? If you translate it into kilowatt hours, I've got a much better chance if I don't cause you to glaze out and zone out completely. Yeah, and that's why we break it down to per unit, per household, per square meter. We've got the data from NRCan for different types of housing in each different province. So I work with Concordia University in Edmonton. I've done an analysis of Alberta, which is a dirtier, I guess is the only term I can use, dirtier site than Ontario. And you know, I've done it for the Northwest Territories. They need an awful lot of heat up there. They've got a problem with permafrost. Ground source doesn't work that well, but just, you know, wherever possible, if you've got the ground and the space and the new build, and it's easy to do it, and you're paying a high cost, blah, 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 do it for goodness sake.
Amazing. Any other questions at all?
Actually, can this Raymond here? Sorry, I joined late. For some reason I thought this started at 7:30. My apologies for being late. But Bill, you were talking about heat pumps and ground source heat pumps, which brings up an interesting topic, which actually I was researching before I got on here. The Ottawa Hospital, I don't know if you're aware of what they're doing, but they're building essentially a utilities plant in 2024, and my understanding is that they plan on installing a large number of natural gas boilers for heating, and it would seem to me that it would be much more well, certainly environmentally friendly and forward-looking to use ground source heating for that the campus there. And given the size of the campus, it should be easy to make it feasible to do that and to actually save money by doing that instead of using natural gas, right?
Yes. Oh, and hospitals are almost similar to schools, that you've got a balanced load, that you have a lot of heating and a lot of cooling, so you can internalize your heat transfer and your loop therefore can be smaller. But you're right, Raymond. The trick is the lobbying being done by other people. What are they called? Gas companies, who are, you know, doing a very good job of saying, we can undercut, we can, you know, and yes, probably on first cost they can, which is why we're trying to get people to understand there is an investment. And as Laura's question was, you know, what is your what's the rate of return that you want, and how long are you going to hang in there? You know what, but those things can be done on a financial calculus basis. So yes, the Ottawa Hospital should learn to look at options, but nobody thinks of options. They simply think, oh, I'm not going to have oil anymore, even propane. I'm not going to have propane anymore, so I've got to have gas. And gas is still installing more and more kilometers of pipeline all around the frigging place. And I wonder why, because Net Zero Plus Canada only cares about thermal load. I'm not competing with wind and solar electricity generation for your toaster and kettle and lights. You know, that's beautiful. Go for it. It's the thermal load, which is 85% of your house, that I'm trying to wipe out, and 82% of your carbon emission. So, you know, if you actually want to reduce your carbon footprint, stop burning gas.
I'll stop burning anything, right?
Well,
So
yeah.
that's why I do EV work. You can see the logo there for EVCO and back there. But I've been talking to some people who are interested in working on a campaign to try to get the Ottawa Hospital to change their plans. And as far as I know, they haven't finished. They haven't had approvals anyways for their utility plant. And it might be an opportunity right now to do something. So Bill, I don't. I know I've seen you before, but I don't really know what you do, and I wonder if there was a possibility to have you and maybe others in the group here help with a campaign to get some sense into the planners and have them well, first of all, you know, if you look at other stuff that's been built in Ottawa, or is being built, the new library, the new National Library, and the main branch is net zero, right? And it's got actually some mass timber in there to sequester some carbon in the structure of the building, and you know, it'd be nice to at least have a net zero building with the new civic campus. But you know, I guess there's some people trying to look for it to form a group to be able to you know, talk to politicians and see what we could do about changing this, right?
Yeah. And I'm a bit of a cynic on many organizations that claim to be net zero by using mass timber. I mean, an average deciduous mature tree, so we're not talking seedling, an average mature tree sequesters 70 kilograms of carbon per year on average. You know, if your house is putting out 3,800 per year from your heating, you know, do you have room for 200 trees, mature trees in your backyard? Sequestering it in the carbon, yeah, it'll stay there, but that's already been counted in the calculation. You know, that's part of Canada's emission. So to claim that I'm going to be net zero by not chopping down 100 trees in my neighborhood, those trees are already calculated.
Yeah. So, but the mass timber calculation though is that if you're going to use steel or concrete instead,
Yes.
producing those emits carbon, whereas mass timber sequesters some carbon. And actually, I've done some calculations myself. I was about how much trees contribute compared to EVs in particular, because EVs is where I do most of my advocacy, and it takes. I can't remember the number, but it takes hundreds of trees anyways to sequester the carbon emitted by just one gas vehicle. So yeah, you know, there's a real issue of scale and all that, right? But the point with the mass timber is to try to tip it a bit in the right direction. But you know, but the net zero is more about the operation of the building, where the building will produce as much energy as what it consumes, right? Which is I mean, there's different things. So in my case, I'm not looking to do net zero at my house. So I have a heat pump, I have a hot water heat pump. I want to be carbon free.
Okay.
Right, that's what I want
Mhm.
to do, which I'm not necessarily concerned about using electricity to heat the house, and I don't have solar to produce electricity, right? But bottom line is, for the hospital, I'd like to get rid of those boilers and use a solution that's more that doesn't emit greenhouse gases like this
Let's
crazy
talk
solution
later.
we have, right?
Let's chat. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one other, Raymond, if I can add one other thing, and I explained that part of the goal of Net Zero Plus Canada is we're dealing with a Winnipeg person who has developed a machine. It's basically a calculator that he can put over, and by doing the temperature differential, again, my apologies to the non-technical people in the audience, but a heat pump can be rated by delta T equations, blah, blah, blah. But his machine can actually calculate on the outlet valve of the compressor how much kilowatt hour of heat, of renewable energy heat, is being flushed out. And we're working on some buildings in the United States, large commercial buildings that have got heat pumps, and we're trying to convince them, your big sign outside your building could say right now, or for the last year, this building has produced X kilowatt hours of renewable energy, but for our lights and appliances and compressor, we're consuming this much. So again, the key here is if net zero is offsetting 1-to-1, a heat pump produces 2 for consumption of 1, which is where the plus comes from. That, we're hoping that's enough. And I mean, literally, that's our marketing campaign. Everybody knows what net zero says. They don't mean it. I don't think many people know what it means, but net zero plus, and people say, what does the plus mean? And I've got 14 seconds to convince you of what it is that can be done. So that's a bit of the marketing hook by using the term plus. So I can actually become a producer of energy in my house instead of a consumer of energy in my house. And if we can get people to start thinking that way, that would be nice.
Yeah, so I guess this ties into district heating system and that kind of stuff, right?
Yes.
So I know the city of Ottawa is very, very interested in promoting district heating and all that, right? And with the Ottawa Hospital, there may be an opportunity to work with developers that are putting in large condo buildings around there to share the facilities and all that, right?
Oh gosh.
And there's a big lake right beside there that could be used as a source of water to heat or cool space, right? So there's lots of opportunities, but I guess the challenge is how do we get this to turn into reality and get them away from this gas plant, right?
And I was on far too many City of Ottawa advisory committees that did not understand energy or environment. That was a bit frustrating. But hey, I've been out of Ottawa now for 3 years. Maybe it's time to go for Mission Impossible again.
Mm-hmm. So Davey is asking, is Carling too far away from the Confederation's Height District energy plant? That I'm not sure which one you're talking about there, Dave. Is that the one you're talking is by the river that heats downtown? Dave?
Heron Road?
Because I'm not sure where Confederation Heights is. I should know, but I don't.
He said Heron Road.
Heron Road. Oh, no, that Heron Road it's not anywhere near there. Yeah, not anywhere near there.
Yeah, Julia, go ahead.
I'm coming. Hi. Hi, Bill. I wanted to really thank you for all your work and meeting with us tonight. It's so great to see people proselytizing about how important this is. And I think as environmentalists, yeah, we all, the step one is we all have to understand it so much better and communicate it so much better.
Yeah.
And yeah, a real takeaway for me tonight is just, I don't know how, but I've been talking about heat pumps for a year now, constantly, and I've never even thought of them as a renewable energy technology. And I think that's for me a big takeaway to start lumping them in there, because people know that and they want to produce renewable energy so badly. We have so many people, we're a neighborhood group, and we have so many people who want to install solar.
Yep.
And we're like, great, but there's so many things that are so much more important to do first.
Yeah.
Solar is at the very end of the list. But yeah, I think the renewable is a good way to instantly get people to think about it. Anyway, like somebody else in the chat, I was just wondering if you could tell us more about Net Zero Plus and your activities. Like, are you doing more lobbying, implementation? What? Tell us more. We were dying to know.
After 10 years of starting it and not getting the industry association to understand it, blah, blah, blah. So we have, I think, gelled, and by hiring Brooke for the summer, it's our first chance to actually cement some of our activities. But no, we do have very discrete targets, as I mentioned before, media, so that, hey, do you want an interesting story on, what's her name? The CBC reporter, who's their climate change person. If I can get on the CBC National, I will be pleased with myself. But many media want to do it. I until recently worked with Mitchell Beer at the Energy Mix. So those type of environmental groups, we ran one with a magazine. There was no feedback to it, but it ran in a magazine. So it was kind of nice, the initial reveal of what it is we were doing. So we want to hit the media so that we can build the excitement, virtually similar to this type of presentation, that you can become a producer instead of just a consumer. Then we have to go after the industry to get them to understand that they are producing renewable energy, and tell consumers that, because as you say, a consumer wants to be on the right side of whatever, and if you're producing, then it's good. I'm not dissing solar electric or wind electric. We need the electricity and we need it. But as you saw that graph, wind and solar are something like 4% of the electricity generated in Canada. And it's on a non-dispatchable basis. So solar only works when there's sun, and wind only works when the wind blows. Gas is unfortunately, on demand. Nuclear cannot be shut down. So Ontario has to get rid of a whole lot of nuclear electricity overnight. Used to work in Manitoba. And Manitoba was brilliant. They dammed up their limestone dams and all of the large hydroelectric systems at night, and bought cheap coal-fired electricity from North Dakota for overnight. And then at 7 o'clock in the morning, they opened the sluice gates, and the hydroelectricity, they ripped off the Americans for a huge amount. And I said, yes, that's my policy too, rip off Americans. But Manitoba Hydro made millions each year by simply buying cheap coal electricity at night and selling high-grade hydroelectricity to the Americans during the day. Okay, we need to generate the electricity, and wind, solar, gas, all of the various things are great. They are all renewable. We need electricity, but I try to stay away from the electricity issue. Somebody is going to get me electrons from the compressor in the heat pump. I stay away from that. All I do, and Net Zero Plus Canada, we focus only on the thermal, because it's 85% of residential and 65% of commercial. It's whatever the number was, 20% of all energy in Canada. And residential thermal is more than all passenger cars. So, if we all put in heat pumps, we've offset the energy consumed by all passenger cars. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't get rid of passenger cars too, but we're looking at incremental values here. So, once we've hit media, after we've hit the industry, after we hit the regulators, go to the various regulatory bodies, OEB, stuff like that. Do you not know that this is a renewable energy that, you should be promoting? Because the regulator hates to not approve and endorse something that is so eminently brilliant, if I can call it that. So regulators, then politicians, the whole bit, and then, the general public are part of it, but it's only the entire country we have to convince of the benefits of the action. So, yeah, 40 million people later. But yeah, you start and, one at a time. And that's the whole idea behind climate change. Climate reality knows that you have to talk to 2 of your neighbors. One of them might understand what it is you're blithering about and might do something, but you have to hit as many people as possible. We're adopting the same approach.
Thank you, and congratulations.
Thank you. All right.
Any final questions? We've got about 10 minutes left, I'd say. When you were talking about how I saw in the chat actually a slight correction to what you were saying once about the heat pump limitations in terms of like only being able to work until, I think you said -25, someone in the chat said -30. Obviously there's like newer technologies coming out. Yeah. But I automatically think about the prairies and the prairie provinces really wanting to address their heat consumption in the wintertime, but not necessarily having means to that just because literally it's too cold there. Like, are there what say you to that to that problem there?
You can get heat, ground source. I mean, the beautiful thing about the loop I installed, because I went deeper than needed, I had installed a 10 kilowatt backup plenum, which you tend to do just in case, like air source, if you don't have an electric plenum or a filament within your air source, if it goes below the -25, -30, whatever the number is you're picking. I mean, you have no heat in the air. You can't transfer it out. You better have heat that you can burn through a filament. So a ground source frequently does the same thing. I think in fairness, because the ground source guys can shave $5,000 off the cost of installing if they make your loop slightly lower, but that puts you close to a vulnerable area that, yeah, okay, you're good to X, but at some point your ground cannot provide the heat that your house needs. I was able to make it longer, so I never did it, but I installed a 10 kilowatt plenum that I turned on for 5 minutes every year in the spring to burn the dust off the filaments. I never got anywhere near needing to use that filament. So I wasted money installing, again, because I got a good deal. It wasn't as much as other people would pay, but I still installed something that was never going to be used.
So Bill, can I add a little anecdote to that? So I have a heat pump that works to -27, and I found out last winter, because it went down to -30, that the supplementary, the backup heat wasn't configured on my furnace. So I did have it installed, but it wasn't configured. So the house started getting colder. But the good news is the house was still warm enough to be livable, and to -30, right? So it worked beautifully in very cold temperatures.
Yeah, and air source works extremely well in moderate temperatures. I mean, Windsors and Victorias. To install a ground source, with all due respect to the ground source industry, I mean, I wouldn't install a ground source and even Halifax, most of the maritime provinces, you don't get that cold, for goodness sake. But if you're talking Northern Ontario, Northern Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, you get very, very cold, and you'd better have something that can hit, I mean, -27, big deal. And yes, we are now hitting 40 degrees in most of the summer, but even there, that's beautiful, because a ground source, an air source, decreases its efficiency in high temperature heat, can't give you as much cooling as my ground source could, because I've got a whole lot of loop and it's discharging the heat from my house into that ground. I've got far more flexibility, diversity, capacity, whatever you want to call it, if you've got a properly sized system. Most houses can scope by, and as you say, you could live in your house, you didn't freeze to death, but a lot of people tend to like living in their house and having it warm and comfortable, not just putting on an extra sweater. Yes, you will save money, and that becomes part of the payoff. Do you want to be marginalized with your heat, or do you want a sweat lodge? We probably could have had a sweat lodge in our last house most of the year if we had wanted to.
Laura asks a question in the chat, which I also have. What's a plenum?
It's part of the furnace where to oversimplify, it's where the heat is heated. It's an integral part of the furnace.
Gotcha. Sounds good. You'll have to make a video of all the diagrams of
Yeah.
heating. I guess I'm obviously giving myself away as not a homeowner. I feel like these are things that you learn as a homeowner or something that who has to deal with these things. And
And we try to avoid using the technical terminology because we don't want homeowners, the industry, the ground source industry talks about laminar flow, which is how fast the water has to flow through the high density polyethylene pipe to transfer in the Reynolds number in the compressor before it goes into the plenum. And if I haven't put you to sleep yet, let me talk for another 3 or 4 seconds. The industry, they're techies. I mean, they love to talk about all of this stuff. Blah, blah, blah. And as I said before, in commercial, they talk tons of cooling load. Nobody knows, well, another engineer in a commercial building knows what a ton of cooling load is, but no normal person does. So can we stop using terminology like that? Again, stops me from comparing a ground source heat pump, which should be rated X kilowatt or kilowatt hour output, with a high efficiency gas furnace. How high efficiency is it? How much heat is the darn furnace putting out? That becomes key, is we've got to have it comparable, because as we go forward, for people like Laura to do the cost analysis, she better know that she's looking at a heat pump that is X rated versus a gas furnace that is X rated. Now you get into the next stage, how much do you need of X versus X? And, but we've got to get to that first step, and clarifying the stupid terminology is step number 1.
Fair enough. Any last minute questions for the last little while?
I'm just wondering if I could give Raymond your email so he can reach out to you, Bill.
Certainly, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you're happy with, I can send your email out to the whole group if that's okay.
Sure. And let me plug the site. We've got 2 domains, long story, because we haven't launched yet until next week. We've got netzeroplus.ca, one word. And I encourage everybody to go there. It's one of our things about counting every kilowatt hour. We've also got net-zero-plus.com, which is, again, another site. Brooke, is it finished yet? But we're trying to get various messages across. So we're trying to compartmentalize, because we've got 2 or 3 messages that we want to keep distinct and clear and very easy to understand. So we are grabbing a couple of domains, but we're having an internal debate. Is this going to confuse people if we've got different domains? So, but certainly go to the -.com or the .ca, and you'll pick up the majority of our bland, boring stuff that we've got ready.
Amazing. Yeah, I'll send that out in the follow-up email as well. That's
Okay.
perfect.
Actually, Bill, maybe we should talk about offline, but it's only in English right now, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I might be able to help you translate it if because it doesn't look like you have that much text in there, right? And I'd be able to help with that.
Merci. Okay, we shall talk offline, Raymond. Okay, thank you.
Amazing.
All right.
Yeah, this is perfect. Teamwork indeed. This is wonderful. Wonderful spontaneity. If I may, I have a final question I'd love to leave on. So, we've talked so much about individual houses, about just all the technologies, but I think going back to the collective issues here, what are some good policies that you would recommend citizens to advocate for from their cities / what would you like to see yourself from governments to support the transitions to adopting heat pump technologies?
If you're talking city to start with, pushing for X rated efficiency, non-carbon emitting technologies, that basically discriminates against everything but heat pumps. So, gosh, what a coincidence. So it has to be non-carbon emitting, and electricity in Ontario is deemed to be non-carbon emitting, even though 20% of our electricity is gas. I'm not going to comment on the 60% from nuclear. Again, I try to stay source agnostic because I only care about thermal. I need the electricity. Just get me the electricity. I don't care how you do it. But yeah, at a city level, building requirements, renovation requirements, standards, that it has to be low carbon, ideally low electricity, because we're going to run, if everybody has an electric vehicle and people charge in peak period, oh my God, we're going to hit an electricity crunch at some stage. So therefore, it should be as low electricity demand as possible. If everybody put in electric baseboards for buildings, we are in serious trouble, assuming you only turn on your baseboards at 7 o'clock in the morning. Goodbye grid. So it should be something that, affects carbon and affects electricity consumption. Those are things that cities actually can act on.
And actually, Bill, one thing that EVs can do, and this will become more prevalent in the future when we have bidirectional charging, but there's programs underway already, pilots and actual programs that have gone beyond pilot, where utilities control when cars get charged. So that allows the utility to decide when is the right time to charge the vehicle. That way, it doesn't add stress to the grid. The other thing too that we could do with EVs, and there's examples, other examples with school buses in particular, where this would be particularly useful, is to use the batteries in those vehicles to shave the peak in the afternoon, right? So lots of really interesting developments there, and things that we need to keep on, to keep pushing, right? So
to that point, I know the head of Toyota. I used to work with him, and he and I were chatting when we were doing our last house, getting a Prius that would allow me to run the compressor in my house if there were a power failure from a Prius, if I bought it, so it was a power source. Then I'd have to drive the Prius around to charge it. But, yes, that type, an electric vehicle should be a battery. And yes, we'd love to cooperate with the EV market, because we both need electricity, but we need the electricity simply to run the thermal and get 85% of the building load and 82% of the carbon gone.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Bill, for your time tonight and all of your wisdom and knowledge. It's been really, really enlightening. I think I speak for everyone when I say I've learned so much. And thank you everyone in this Zoom room for your participation. There's been so many really great questions, so much participation, so much teamwork, so much collaboration, so many campaign ideas that we're also firing back and forth in the chat. The chat's been really, really active this whole meeting. It's been really great to also have that on the side as well. So thank you everyone for your time tonight. It's been really wonderful.
Thank you, Hope, and thank you everyone. Okay.
Amazing. Well, have a wonderful rest of your night. As I mentioned before, we won't be having an August community call, but come back in September and we'll be talking a little bit about gravel mining quarries and all that jazz in Ontario. And so if you're interested in that and learning more about that, we'll be posting a little bit sooner to that date. So thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your summer, everybody.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
everyone.
thanks,
Bye.
bye.
Bye. Thank you.